Happy Mother's Day. If you are new today, I'm especially grateful that you're here, and maybe you're a mom and you tortured your child by bringing them here with you, or maybe you tortured your mom by bringing them here, who knows. But either way, I would love to get a chance to meet you face to face, put a name with your face. We have something we're instituting and kind of trying it out. We're calling it Last Call. So at the end of the service, we've got the back of the exit sign, myself and Matt and Taryn and Austin from our staff will be back there. And we just want to put a name to a face, and you've been around here maybe for a brief period of time, and you maybe got some questions, or you want to jump into something, but you're not sure what to do. So we'd love to be able to meet you in the back, and so please do so on your way out if you would. So again, Happy Mother's Day. I have this honor of having my grandmother in the space with us, who she was one of the founding members of this community 13 years ago. My grandmother and grandfather, I have been a blessed man in so many fronts. And I remember I was in college, and I think I was like a sophomore, junior, maybe even a senior, and I called them up, and they lived in Arkansas, and I was in Virginia, and I called them up and said, listen, I've got a week off at Christmas because the work I was doing on the job I only had a week off, and I would love to spend that week with you. Are you okay with that? And she was like, oh, that would be wonderful. You know, I mean, it's what a grandparent's supposed to say. And on top of that, I don't have any money to fly out there. Would you fly me out there? Of course, no problem. And so my grandparents, the prayers of them, the faithfulness, the consistency, and I am just honored to have my grandmother with me today. So Grandma, it's good having you. And of course, my mother, who also is a founding member of this community. Basically, we started it with a bunch of Watershed Hofert people. So that's, Mom, grateful for you and just what you have instilled in my brothers and I, and somebody who just, I mean, there's something sacred about you moms. Like, you have the ability to believe something, hold something, understand something, and then in your children, when it's not the same, somehow still love and accept all of that, right? Like you have this ability just to, we say the words around here often, hold the tension, and you do it beautifully. And Mom, you're an amazing example of that. A mom, a businesswoman, the whole thing. And so thank you for all that you do and pour into us. And then, of course, my wife, who I get to watch her mothering every day and how she is so good with our kids. I've got amazing women in my life, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm grateful for the hours that you guys invest in, and just across the board, watching. At the end of the day, the church is propped up by women. It just is. And thank you for the way that you put your arms around us as a community, and you just parent well. You just nurture well. Whether you have a child or not, like, there's something beautifully internal to that. And so it's good to have you here today, and thank you for being the rock stars that you are, moms. So we are in this series, Organized Religion versus Disorganized Religion. You know, it's this sort of bipolar conversation that, if we're not careful, we will kind of get a little cocky, thinking somehow here at Watershed, we've got it all figured out. The sort of disorganized religious space out there is wrong, and we as this sort of disorganized community have got it figured out. And I want to be real careful that we don't go there. Although I do think we've got it figured out better. But it's another side conversation. So here's the deal. In organized religion, what happens, and again, the metaphor of that is invariably it's a top-down conversation. It's people who are seemingly having it all figured out. They're the experts, they're the pros, and we submit to their ideas, their leadership, their theology, whatever it is. It's this idea that there are these tomes of information, of theology, of doctrine, of institution that have been around for centuries, maybe even millennia, and somehow those tomes are accurate, and so we submit to that kind of idea, those kinds of thoughts. That's organized religion. Disorganized religion says it's about the people. It's grassroots. It's earthy, it's emerging. It's what you have to say is deeply valuable because God is in you, God has made you, and so the voice that comes from that is an informed voice, is a God voice. And so we hear that with a sense of integrity and a sense of quality, and want you to feed into the community as we're feeding back and forth to each other. So a very different experience in terms of organized versus disorganized. And so I was in the book of Exodus this past week,
And this passage sort of jumped off the page at me, and I want to take a second, but before I jump into it, I want to kind of set up where we're going this morning. So, if you've done any reading of the scriptures at a baseline level, you know there's a story of this guy by the name of Abraham in Genesis. And Abraham was told by God that he is going to be the father of Israel, this new movement that is going to come on the scene, and he's going to be the impetus of that. And there's one sort of commission that Abraham was told to make sure that Israel understands. And it's this, that they were to be this extension of a blessing, of generosity, of serving to the world. That was their role. They were not to be a political entity. They were not to be a system of power. They were to be this movement of generosity and this movement of caring for other people. So we jump ahead a whole bunch of time, and Israel finds themselves in a really bad place, and they are being enslaved by Egypt. 300 to 400 years or so, they're being enslaved. And for the first couple hundred years, it's possible that it was relatively tolerable. Maybe not that big of a deal. Maybe they kind of got used to it. But at some point, the noise of where they were and the frustration, the angst of being enslaved got to them. And they began sort of hollering out to God. Where are you? What's going on? And so that's where we find ourselves here in Exodus 3. So the Lord is saying to Moses in Exodus 3, Moses is the liaison between Egypt and soon in Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. And I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, a bunch of other ites. Verse 9, and now the cry of the Israelites. So the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring the people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So what is happening here? There's a whole bunch of things going on here. Interesting stories and dialogue and all that's going on here. But there's this phrase that's jumping out of the page as I read this passage a couple of different times where the people of Israel are crying out. They're in the sense of, God, we're tired of it. We can't take it anymore. And they begin the sort of, God, where are you? We want healing in this. We want restoration. We want redemption in this. And something begins to happen. It's as though God says, all right, they're crying out. Now let's engage them. Wait a minute, they really want me. So, okay, I'm here. I'm going to be present in the space. Oh, they really want a space of healing and change and shift. Okay, now I'll show up because they're crying out for me. They want me to be there in that space. And God hears the cry of the oppressed. It's kind of the narrative throughout the scriptures. And so maybe we can personalize this here, that when we cry out, somehow God shows up. That when we make noise towards God, there's deep pain or there's deep hurt or tension or whatever it is, somehow God shows up in that space. Have you ever sat in a room, and in that room was somebody that was crying? Not just like tears that are kind of nice and are gently moving, but the kind of tears, the kind of cry that is guttural, right? That is coming from this interior, this pain that is so intense that nobody in the room can just fix it, and this person knows that, and it's this almost hopeless kind of cry. This loss is so great. A couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago or so now, I sat in a room with 6 or 7 other people, good friends. And one of the people that we were in that room with was experiencing this kind of loss. The loss that there was such hopelessness. And the tears and the crying was so loud and so intense. And there was nothing we could say. This person wasn't looking for words. They weren't even looking for solutions. It was, can I just be in a room with my people? And in that space, all of us turned towards this person, kept our attention on this person, and we're giving them our full presence. Because when people cry out, that's what you do. when people are asking and begging and wanting healing, you have this sense of, oh, I want to respond. I want to be in that space. And maybe God was doing the same thing. That he was saying, Israel, you're crying out, and so I am here. I am present. I am in this with you. I know this is what moms do. So I'm going to kind of beat the mom metaphor to death this morning if I can, because it's a good day to do so. And I know in our house, invariably we will have other kids over. So friends will be over. You may jump around the trampoline. They might be hanging out in the front yard. And there might be 5 or 6 kids. And invariably, it always happens, a fight ensues. Somebody's upset. Somebody got hurt. Somebody said something they shouldn't have said, whatever it is. And invariably, like those 4 or 5 are now ganging up on that one. And so that one kid now has all of them coming out against him. And maybe he starts to be a little upset or angry, or maybe he's a little bit younger and he starts crying. And my wife has this ability, like this spider sense, to hear across the house even if the kids are outside, like runs outside, and instantly all 4 of the kids who are coming down on that one like get their world rocked by my wife as she comes around and protects sort of the underdog in the space. And there's something about when we cry out, it's as though God's saying, I got your back. I'm in this with you. It wakes him up differently to the space, into who you are, into the presence of what is going on. And so for God, for Israel, Exodus was the response to the cry of the people. I'm going to give you an exodus. I'm going to give you ultimately a way out. And what God is doing in that, when we cry out as the underdog, when we cry out as the person, as though the whole world is coming down on us, when we cry out from that space, what it does is it turns the system completely on its head. Because the underdog, the person at the bottom rung, they are the one that gets the attention from God. It shifts the entire piece. And so what is going on in this space? What is going on with this sense that when we cry out, God is there for us? Well, a couple of things come to mind. I guess maybe one of those is that we are invited to move toward the cry. So for some of you, you are advocates at the core of who you are. I mean, invariably, some of you, you're always trying to help fix somebody else's need, or you're always seemingly on the edge of starting another new prophet. Like you have this longing to say, I too can hear when people are crying out, and I want to be in that space with them. And so when we hear the cry, we often are moved towards it. It draws us in. I know here at Watershed, this is another word for justice for us. That we long to see people who are hurting, people who can't lift up their own arms, that we come alongside them and we get to do that. That is a luxury that we get to have, and that's part of what when we hear this cry of people, we get to respond to. That Moses, he was the liaison. He was the guy, he was the middle person that many of us are often invited to be for other people. That we are the ones that are maybe we have the connections or the resources. I know my wife has this. We've got 2 kids we're putting through the CMS system, and at the end of the day, our kids are benefiting hugely from that system. Not all kids get to benefit equally, and we know that. And that's not necessarily I'm not going after anybody on that, but we know a little bit how the system works for our boys, and so we've been able to use that to be able to help other families that we're close with that might not have the luxury of going to the schools that they would really like to be in and that would really be ideal for their circumstance. And so we know people that know people that know people, and we pull those strings once in a while because we get the privilege of being an advocate. And you begin to realize that when these people are when that single mom is crying out for a space for her child in a school that is really conducive because her kid needs something a little extra, a little bit different, and maybe that mom doesn't know how to make that happen, but we know somebody that knows somebody, and so we pull that string and people respond. Why? Because you hear the cry. That when people are crying out, it pulls us towards them. It creates this longing for us to want to be able to be a part of healing that person. Maybe this other observation, at least as I'm reading this passage, that the cry reveals the audacity of the victimizer. Like there's something about when the person cries out that what it does is it reveals the dark side of the people that are bringing the pain in, that are bringing the hurt. It reveals that there's this one side that is really messed up, and it might actually slow down what the other person's trying to do as the victimizer, because they realize, wait a minute, I'm now being revealed in this. I remember often as a kid growing up in my home, I have two brothers I'm really close to now, but when we were kids, we were at each other's throats all the time. And my younger, I'm the oldest of three, and the middle brother, he is about 16 months younger than I am. And when we were growing up, he was just a little guy, and now he's big and he can kick my butt. But in those days, he was a little guy, and he was just fun to sort of taunt, like poke him in the chest or trip him outside, things that older brothers do. And knowing that I would elicit this, he has this anger inside because probably I, harassed him as a child. I'd bring it out, and he'd want to fight me, and awesome. And then, of course, I was bigger, so I could beat him up. But invariably, my mom would walk out, and she would see what was going on, and I would be revealed as the one not being the good brother. Because what happens when you hear the cry of the innocent, the audacity of the victimizer emerges. You see what's going on in that space. And then lastly, and this to me is the thing that it makes me so grateful for this space, for this community, that disorganized religion, it welcomes the cry. Sometimes in more organized religion, more clean-cut, neat spaces, there's no room for darkness. There's no room for pain. Everything is kind of glossy and clean and pretty, and you don't have the sobbing cries that maybe sometimes we get to experience in a place like a Watershed, where we welcome your pain. I'm going to say we're going to handle it perfectly every time. We might not be able to do anything, but sometimes just sit with it. But we welcome your pain, because the disorganized religiosity welcomes the cry. That what ends up happening is when you sit in a room of people who know pain, and people who are going through pain, it's as though God is showing up, maybe even in a little bit more, unique way. Because the cry is soliciting him. Because the cry is drawing him forth. And so when you sit in a room like this and you talk about pain, your heads nod. Yeah, I get it. When I look out and I see many of you who've had an amazing year, it's been a really good year, but the year before was crazy, or this past year, it's been really hard. Everything that could go wrong seemingly is going wrong, and somehow we sit in this space together. You sit in your small group on a random Tuesday night, and you talk about the reality of your pain, and what it does is it brings God into that space, and it makes it beautifully organic and chaotic and messy all at the same time. There's something sacred about the reality of equalizing the playing field with pain. And when you cry out your pain, what it does is it brings us in. We get to hear it. We get to be a part of it. And so here's what I want to do. I want to take just a few minutes this morning. And I want to introduce you into, so I've been kind of the last couple of weeks, I've talked a little bit about my own practice in terms of visualization. For me, it's been a very transformative practice. And so I want to invite you into some visualization this morning, kind of a reflective time. So the only thing you got to do is close your eyes and just push out all the noise. So I'm going to invite you to kind of just to close your eyes. And here's what I want you to think about. One of two scenarios. The first scenario is, what pain are you living with that is so intense that it's just you feel like Israel crying out to God. You need to be relieved of this pain somehow, some way, and so you're crying out to God. That's one scenario. The second scenario is, maybe you feel like you're in a relatively whole place right now, but you know somebody else that's in a dark space. And so you're going to be their Moses. You're going to be their advocate. You're going to kind of grab them by the arm. And so one of those two scenarios, you're in deep pain yourself, or you've got somebody that you know that really needs you in their life because the cries are going out. And so imagine going to your favorite park. I don't know, maybe it's Freedom Park, maybe it's Independence Park over here, maybe it's Central Park in New York, maybe you have a place you grew up, maybe it's somewhere outside. Ideally somewhere it's outside. There's a park bench there. And you go out into this space and you sit down on this park bench. Now you might be sitting down with this friend of yours, or you're just sitting there by yourself. Again, no words need to be exchanged. It's just you in that space by yourself, or in that space with this person who's going through deep pain. And maybe you just imagine yourself just kind of opening up and letting the floodgates flow, and you're okay with your emotions just being in that space. Or maybe you've got your arm around that person and they're crying and you're just supporting them, but you're in that space of just letting it flow. Nobody else is interrupting you. People are walking by. They're kind of letting you be. And then out of nowhere, you feel this arm come around you. And you look over and you realize God is in that space with you. Whatever God looks like to you. That he's in that space and he's saying, I've heard your cry. The promised land, something down the road, is there. And the promised land might be full of healing, or the promised land might be just you are a renewed person because that brokenness, that pain has changed you. It's marked you. It's morphed you. And so you sit in that space and you are experiencing at least a little bit of relief because you are in it with God, and he is saying to you, I am hearing your cry. I care for you because you are my creation. You're an extension of who I am. You might not think you've got the ability or the goods or the strength to make it, but you have to know and you have to be reminded that I am with you in this. And we can make this together. And so for some of you right now, you're dealing with stuff at home. Maybe marriage stuff is unraveling. That's a lot of you in this space right now. I know that personally. Many dozens of you. The first service as well. For others of you, you're dealing with empty nest stuff. Man, the loss of that person in my home, or you're dealing with career shifts, or what do I do next, or loneliness, or depression, or addiction. I want you to cry that out in that moment, in that space, in that park bench to God. I'm going to let you take 60 seconds and kind of just, you be in that space. So, Father, I know sometimes being internal is very painful. Sometimes going to the interior space can be really hard because it's forcing us to deal with our reality. That in this amazing, organic space of a community of disorganized chaos on a good day, we welcome your change. We welcome your shifting and your editing. We welcome your transformation. And Father, I hope that sitting on that park bench today, maybe there was just a subtle reminder, if nothing else, for many of us that you hear our cry, in that we are literally being heard by the essence of the universe. Father, may there be this reawakening, this reminder that we are a community of the people. And when we cry out, when we ask,
it's like the magic potion that somehow awakens you to saying, all right, I'm going to show up for that kind of stuff because you're hurting and there's a need. And God, may we not only do that in our own lives towards you, but may we also be the liaison for people who are also finding themselves in deep places of hurt and pain. And the role that we get to play is advocacy. That we get to jump in and realize that the cry reveals the audacity of the victimizer. And that we are invited to move towards others that are crying, and there's something compelling about that. While it's hard to be in it, we want to bring healing, we want to bring hope, and we want to represent you well to them. So God, we are grateful. We're grateful for a day like today when we get to sit in a room, hopefully enjoying the reality of our moms today. But for some in this space, a day like today brings pain, or maybe great memories, but the pain of them not, of that child or that parent, that mom more specifically, not being around. And so, Father, we want that cry to also be heard. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for caring for us. Thank you for hearing us.